A teenage girl stands alone in a crowded airport terminal, unable to hear the chaos around her, but she feels it. 16-year-old Cailey Gallagher is used to misunderstanding, but nothing prepares her for the humiliation that unfolds at Gate 22. When a gate agent's frustration turns physical, everyone stops to stare. But no one knows who Cailey really is, or who's waiting just a few steps away. This isn't just a story about ignorance. It's about how fast power can shift when the truth lands. What happens when the person you dismissed holds the keys to your future? Cailey Gallagher stood motionless, phone in hand, eyes focused, fingers moving in rapid, practiced flicks. Her screen lit up with a text from Toby. "Yo, don't forget snacks. You know they only got sad airport pretzels." A soft smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, invisible to most. She didn't laugh, not out loud, but she felt it. The way anyone else would hear laughter, she felt the spark of it buzz through her ribs like a gentle vibration. She tugged her backpack tighter over one shoulder and adjusted her hoodie, black with red sleeves. Her favorite, soft from 100 washes. Her curly hair, twisted into 2 low puffs, framed a face that always looked a little more serious than her age. People often thought she was older. Maybe it was the way she looked right at you when you spoke, searching your lips for shape, your eyes for intent. She didn't like this terminal. Too many flashing screens, too many mouths moving and no real words, just noise, or what would be noise for someone else. For her, it was pressure in the air, 100 micro movements layered over each other like shadows. She could feel someone shouting even if she couldn't hear it. She could sense tension the same way others might catch a scream. Her dad, Robert, had stepped away to take a call. He was probably 10 gates away, somewhere near security, where the Wi-Fi was stronger. He hated airports, said they were just business deals with bad lighting. But he never showed it. He always moved like the ground belonged to him. Never rushed, never flustered. Cailey pulled up her boarding pass on her phone and joined the line that had started to form near Gate 22. She was early. He had insisted on that. "The world don't run on your clock, baby," he'd said this morning, tapping her forehead gently. "So we show up early and we move smart." She was doing exactly that. Diane Walker leaned against the counter with her arms crossed tight across her chest. Her badge was slightly crooked, pinned to her blouse like an afterthought. She hated her job today. She hated most things today, if she were being honest. Her feet hurt, her lunch break had been delayed, and some teenager just spilled half a soda on the floor without telling anyone. The janitor hadn't even come by yet. Sticky spots tracked all the way from Gate 20 to her side of the counter, and she swore one more kid dragging a wheeled backpack across it was going to make her snap. She watched the crowd shuffle in like they always did. People moved slow when they had nowhere to be and fast when they were about to be late. Didn't matter. They were all the same. Faces buried in phones, kids with their mouths hanging open, people asking questions that had already been answered 5 times on the board above her head. And then she saw her. The girl, black girl, maybe 15 or 16, alone, standing in line but not reacting when Diane called out, "Pre-boards and families only, folks. Everyone else, please wait." Diane squinted. The girl didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at her phone like the world didn't exist. Or worse, like Diane didn't. "Hello? I said pre-boards and families only," Diane snapped louder, her voice cutting across the terminal like a paper slice. Still nothing. The girl took a small step forward with the line. Diane felt the heat rising behind her ears. She walked around the counter, heels clicking, and got within 3 feet before barking, "Miss, are you listening? I said—" The girl turned slowly. She tilted her head and blinked once, then tapped something on her phone and held it up. "Hi, I'm deaf. I'm just waiting for my boarding group. Thank you." Dilfer Diane stared at the screen for a beat too long. Then she scoffed. "This is what I'm talking about," she muttered, voice low but biting. "Kids these days think it's okay to ignore authority and play the disability card when it suits them. Taylor flinched. She hadn't heard the words, but she felt the air change, the tension in Diane's jaw, the tightening of the line behind her, the subtle shift of people looking but not stepping in. Her chest tightened, not from fear. No, it was something older, heavier, familiar. She typed another message. Slowly, carefully. I'm not playing anything. I just need you to point if it's my turn. I can't hear the announcements. On how far's Diane didn't look at the screen this time. She waved it off. I don't have time for this. You think I got all day to cater to every special request? Her voice was rising, shrill now. Maybe if you'd listened the first time, we wouldn't be having this conversation. A hush started to settle over the space. Not real silence, of course, but that collective pause. The kind that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Cailey stepped back, her fingers trembling. Her heart thudded like a bass speaker under her ribs. She looked down, trying to type one more message, just one more to make it stop. Then Diane slapped the phone from her hand, ill with a clack. And the gasp that followed didn't need sound. She could see it ripple through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Cailey stood frozen. Diane's hand still hung in the air, suspended like even she didn't expect it to go that far. But her face hardened again quickly. She folded her arms. Maybe next time you'll pay attention. Someone said, "Hey," from behind. Another voice murmured, "Did she just—" Cailey slowly bent down and picked up her phone. The screen had cracked, not bad, but enough to spider the corner. She stared at it, numb, the cold from the floor biting into her knees. Someone stepped forward from the crowd. A woman with two toddlers clinging to her legs. She held up a hand. "Excuse me, that girl was just standing there. She didn't do anything." Diane turned on her. "Ma'am, this is airport security protocol. She was ignoring me, and I did what I had to do to get her attention." "Of course," Hertu said. Cailey blinked up at her, lips parted. Her phone shook in her hand as she typed again, this time with more effort. "I can't hear you. You hurt me. Why?" She held it up. Diane looked away. More people were pulling out phones now, recording, whispering. A man walked briskly toward the counter, radio clipped to his belt. Uniformed. Tall. Cailey didn't recognize him, but he looked official. She needed her dad. She needed her dad now. She scanned the hallway. Still no sign of him. Her eyes blurred. Not from tears, but from the way her brain started to detach, float, twist. This had happened before, in other ways, in classrooms where teachers didn't know how to slow down or with kids who thought signing was funny. But never like this, never so public, never so exposed. And still, nobody really stepped forward. Not until a voice echoed from behind her, low and steady. "Is there a reason my daughter is being threatened in the terminal of an airline I own?" And just like that, the ground beneath Gate 22 began to shift. Diane Walker knew she had gone too far the second her hand came down and smacked that phone from the girl's hand. But pride? That was louder than reason. She watched the cracked screen bounce on the linoleum, felt eyes lock onto her from every direction, and still she doubled down. The teenager had attitude. That's what Diane told herself. If she really was deaf, why didn't she have a parent nearby? Why didn't she look more disabled? She didn't walk with a cane or have any device, just stood there like she owned the place, staring through people like they were background noise. Diane took a small step back from the counter, brushing invisible dust from her blouse. She turned sharply to face the approaching man, the one whose voice had cut through the moment like a blade. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but there was something about the way he walked, deliberate, composed, not asking permission to be there. The girl looked up suddenly, her face cracking into recognition, relief flooding her like breath after being underwater too long. "Sir, please return to the waiting area. Diane snapped, instinct taking over. Her voice was clipped, professional again. "This is a restricted gate. We're in the middle of a situation." "I can see that," the man said coolly, eyes moving from Diane to Cailey, then back again. "And what I'm trying to understand is why you've put your hands on a minor who also happens to be deaf." Diane's mouth opened, then closed. "She was non-compliant," she said, louder now because authority sounded stronger when spoken firmly. "She ignored repeated verbal commands." "She can't hear verbal commands," he said, still quiet, still terrifying in his calm. "You just assaulted a child. Would you like to try another excuse? And sir, if you don't calm down, I'll have to—" "What?" he said, stepping forward slowly. "Have me removed from my own gate? Call airport security on the man who writes their check?" A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Did he just say his gate?" Diane frowned. "I don't know who you think you are." "Robert Gallagher," he replied, producing a sleek wallet from his coat. The badge inside wasn't TSA. It wasn't a pilot's license. It was an executive access pass bearing the Skyrise Air seal, gold-stamped and undeniable. Diane's words caught in her throat. She recognized the name. Not from training, not from memos, but from the magazine article she'd skimmed in the break room last week. The Invisible Tycoon, How Robert Gallagher Built Skyrise Air from a two-plane dream into a billion-dollar empire. She stared at him. No suit, just a gray sweater, dark jeans, worn leather shoes. No entourage, just presence. "I didn't know," she started. "No, you didn't," he said. "Because you didn't ask. You didn't bother. You saw a young black girl standing alone, not reacting the way you thought she should, and you made a choice." Behind her, another airline employee shuffled forward, young, nervous. Her name tag read Mallory. "Mr. Gallagher, sir," Mallory said, hesitating. I can get someone to take over this gate if you prefer." He held up a hand. "Stay where you are." Cailey was still kneeling. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone. The spiderweb crack sliced across the corner of the screen, but the display still worked. She held it up to her father, lips moving without sound, and he leaned down, reading. "I didn't do anything wrong." Robert's jaw tightened. "I know, baby." He turned back to Diane, now visibly sweating. "What's your name?" "Diane Walker," she said, stiffly. "Deal with the company." "And in all that time, have you ever been trained in how to assist nonverbal or hearing-impaired passengers?" She paused. "We have an online module," she mumbled. "Did you pass it?" "Yes. But nothing," Robert cut in. "Let me make something very clear, Miss Walker. My daughter has dealt with people like you her entire life. People who look at her and decide she's less capable, less deserving of patience, less human." "I didn't know she was your daughter," Diane blurted, as if that somehow changed the gravity of what she'd done. "That's the problem," he said. "You shouldn't have to know who she belongs to in order to treat her with dignity." Behind them, more passengers were filming. The woman from earlier, Nancy, stepped forward again. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "Your daughter was just standing there. That woman kept yelling at her, and then, bam!" She mimed the slap. It was awful. Robert nodded once. "Thank you." Diane turned toward Nancy, mouth tight. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Nancy said. "You don't just get to hurt people and walk away, not in public. Not anymore." Robert stepped in again. "Ms. Walker, you will remain here until my team arrives. I've already contacted Skyrise's compliance officers. In the meantime, you are not to speak to my daughter, or anyone else." "You can't." "I can," he said, voice cold as glass. "And I just did." A silence hung in the air. Diane looked smaller now. Not physically, but in that way people do when their power evaporates. Robert knelt beside Cailey again, brushing her hair back with a tenderness that didn't fit the cold edges he'd just shown. She signed something with one hand, fingers slow from the adrenaline still pouring through her. He nodded, responding with clumsy signs of his own. Not perfect, but full of effort. Mallory stepped closer. "Mr. Gallagher, sir, would you like me to escort you and your daughter to the lounge?" He looked at Cailey. She nodded once. As they walked away, the crowd parted like water. No applause, no shouts, just the quiet respect that follows someone who'd made a storm without raising their voice. Diane stood still, arms limp at her sides, eyes darting to every phone still held up. She wanted to shout, to say she didn't mean it, that it had been a mistake, that she was under pressure or tired or overwhelmed, but none of that mattered anymore. Not to the girl with the cracked phone, not to the man who controlled her entire future. As Cailey and her father turned the corner toward the private elevator leading to the executive lounge, she glanced back once, just once, and met Diane's eyes. There was no anger there, no gloating, just that same stillness she had when it all began. That calm that people mistake for passivity. That silence that spoke louder than anything Diane had ever said in her life. The private elevator doors slid shut behind them with a hushed whisper. The noise of the terminal sealed away like a bad memory. Inside the lift, Cailey pressed her lips together and stared at the faint, mirrored reflection of her face in the brushed steel wall. Her father stood next to her, his hands in his pockets, shoulders square, his gaze fixed on the floor display ticking up. He hadn't said a word since they stepped in, but she could feel the fury rolling off him in quiet waves. She wanted to tell him not to make it worse. Not for her, she could carry what happened, but because she knew how the world worked. She had learned early that power scared people, but black power, that terrified them. And people terrified of you would do anything to make sure you stayed in your place. She tugged on his sleeve gently. He turned to her, softening as he looked down. Her fingers began to sign slowly, her movements careful. "It's okay, Dad." He sighed. "No, it's not." She typed something on her cracked screen and handed it to him. "It's not the first time." His jaw clenched. "It'll be the last." They stepped into the Skier Rise executive lounge, tucked above the noise and fluorescent chaos. The lighting was soft, the furniture modern and quiet in its expense. A concierge moved toward them, but Robert raised one hand and she retreated without a word. Cailey sat on the edge of one of the couches and let herself sink into the plush fabric. She felt like her body had finally remembered it was tired. Her fingers ached, her knees burned from where she'd crouched to pick up her phone. Her chest buzzed with an old, familiar pressure she'd learned to live with, but never gotten used to. Robert stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't pace, didn't fidget, just listened. Then, "Get me legal. All of them. I want Diane Walker's file pulled and every incident report she's touched in the last year, audited, and someone from PR, quiet but fast." He ended the call and finally looked back at Cailey. "I'm handling it." She didn't doubt him, but she also knew the system didn't always bend to justice. She texted him again. What's going to happen to her? She's going to lose more than just her job. Cailey hesitated before typing the next part. People will say I overreacted, that I made it about race, or that I made it up. He sat beside her. Let them. She didn't respond. He exhaled, long and slow. You've been through this too many times. She nodded. I didn't know it still happened like this, not in my house. She turned to him, arching a brow. He chuckled, but there was no real joy in it. Okay, maybe not my house, but my airline? My gates? No, that's different. That's going to be different. A knock on the glass door pulled his attention. A man in a navy suit, tall, thin, with a receding hairline and a tablet in hand, entered at Robert's gesture. "Tom Green," he said, nodding to both of them. "Airport operations. Mr. Gallagher, I came as soon as I heard." Robert didn't shake his hand. "This is my daughter, Cailey. She was assaulted in your terminal today." Tom shifted, unsure of where to place his weight. "I saw the footage. We're deeply concerned. I've already pulled security logs and requested body cam footage from nearby TS." Cailey narrowed her eyes slightly. She didn't trust the sudden urgency. She didn't trust the polished words. Tom cleared his throat. "We're placing Ms. Walker on immediate administrative leave, pending full investigation, of course." Robert raised an eyebrow. "She should have been walked out the moment she laid a hand on my child." "Yes, sir, I agree, but HR procedures." "I own the HR procedures," Robert snapped. Tom blinked. "Right, of course." Cailey tapped her father's arm. She held up her phone, another message ready. "It's just damage control. He doesn't care." Robert nodded subtly. "Dismissed." Tom looked between them, hesitating as though expecting some form of appreciation. When none came, he turned and left. The room was quiet again. Cailey slumped back and let her head fall against the cushion. She didn't want to think about Diane. She didn't want to think about the crowd or the phones or the way her body still shook in places. What stuck with her wasn't the slap. It wasn't even Diane's voice. It was the moment just before. The look in Diane's eyes. Not rage, not even frustration. Just dismissal, like she wasn't real. Like her silence meant she didn't exist. That's what hurt. Her dad stood and pulled out his phone again, this time holding it up so she could see it too. It was a video. Someone had posted a clip of the moment Diane struck the phone. You couldn't hear it, but you didn't need to. The sound was irrelevant. The movement, the gasp, the wide-eyed horror of the crowd. And Cailey, small, quiet still. Already the caption was making rounds. Gate agent. "Assaults deaf teen. Father is CEO of the airline." The comments were filling fast. "This is disgusting." She didn't even fight back. "Glad her dad has power. Most of us don't." "Help that woman gets fired." Imagine how often this happens to people who aren't rich. Cailey watched it loop again and again. She wanted to look away. She couldn't. Her father noticed. "You don't have to read those. I'll have it taken down." She shook her head. She typed. "Let him see, let him feel it." He smiled at her. Pride mixed with grief. "You know," he said, "when you were born, I promised I'd give you a world that made room for you." Cailey turned toward him slowly. She signed. "The world doesn't make room." He nodded. "Then we build it ourselves." She leaned into his side and he put an arm around her. Not because she needed protecting, but because she deserved comfort. They sat like that while the lounge stayed quiet, the soft hum of the city-side windows casting orange light on their faces. Somewhere below, Diane Walker was being escorted into a small security office. Her voice was louder now, accusing everyone but herself. And across the country, her face was going viral. Justice doesn't always come quickly. But sometimes it boards early. The airport terminal had never felt quieter, despite the noise. Conversations now were hushed, not because people weren't talking, but because they were watching. Watching the gate where it happened, watching their screens, watching each other. Nancy Flores sat near gate 24 with her 2 toddlers curled up against her thighs. One of them had fallen asleep with a half-eaten bag of crackers in her lap. The other traced lazy lines along the stripes in his mother's leggings, silent for once. She couldn't stop replaying what she'd seen. She'd only looked up because the agent had raised her voice. Then there was the girl, so still, so calm. And then the slap, or maybe it wasn't a full slap, more like a backhand swipe at the phone. But it didn't matter. That sound, even if she couldn't quite remember it, had cut through everything. Nancy had worked in community services before she became a stay-at-home mom. She knew the difference between authority and cruelty, and that woman had crossed the line like it wasn't even there. She looked down at her own daughter, who was asleep, pink lips slightly open, cheeks flushed from too many gummy bears. What if it had been her? What if someone had treated her like that, dismissed her, hurt her, humiliated her, and people just watched? No, that didn't sit right. She looked around. Others had their phones out, talking in low voices. A few had posted on Twitter or TikTok. She could tell by the way they were typing one-handed, faces half-shielded. But nobody seemed to be stepping up. So Nancy stood. She adjusted her sleeping daughter on her hip and walked back to gate 22. The gate was now manned by a young woman, brunette, early 20s, who looked like she'd just been shoved into the spotlight with no warning. Her badge read, Mallory. She glanced up as Nancy approached, offering a brittle smile. Hi, do you need help with rebooking? Nancy shook her head. No, I'm not here for that. Mallory blinked. Okay. I was here earlier. I saw what happened with that young girl. Oh, Mallory said, voice dropping. Right. That. I'd like to give a statement, if someone's collecting them. Mallory looked around nervously. We're not law enforcement, so, no official reports, but I can call the supervisor. Please do. Mallory nodded and grabbed her walkie. Nancy stepped aside and set her daughter down gently in one of the seats, wrapping a blanket around her. Within minutes, the supervisor returned. Tom Green. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, though it had only been hours. He offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mom, I understand you witnessed the incident? I did. Would you be willing to write down what you saw? I'd prefer to say it out loud. Right here. Nancy's voice was even, not angry, but grounded, steady. People need to hear it. Tom hesitated, then motioned to Mallory. She can record it, if that's okay. Fine by me. Mallory brought over a small tablet, hit record, and Nancy began. Saw the agent, Diane, speak loudly to the girl multiple times. The girl didn't respond, didn't look up. I remember thinking maybe she had headphones in, but then I noticed something else. She wasn't reacting to anyone. Not the overhead announcements, not the people near her, nothing. And when she showed her phone, I saw it clearly. It said she was deaf. Nancy paused. Mallory gave a slight nod, encouraging her to continue. Diane got upset, said something about playing the disability card. That's a direct quote. Then she swiped the phone right out of the girl's hand. No warning, just did it. It hit the ground. People gasped. Tom cleared his throat. And you're certain about what you saw? I'm a mother of two. I'm very sure when I see someone being mistreated. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make Tom flinch. You want to talk about procedures and training and optics? Fine. But that woman's behavior wasn't a training issue. That was a hard issue. She didn't see that girl. She saw a problem, something inconvenient, and she lashed out. You don't fix that with a webinar. Tom didn't respond. He just gave a tight nod and tapped his tablet. Nancy walked back to her kids and sat down. She didn't need to watch the video again. It was already burned into her memory. Meanwhile, in the executive lounge, Cailey sat with her knees tucked up under her hoodie, her legs folded tight to her chest. Her dad had stepped out for a call. She was alone again, but it didn't feel like before. Her phone was buzzing non-stop. Some notifications were from Toby. Are you okay? It's all over TikTok. Swear if I was there. Dude, your dad went off. Others were from people she didn't know. Tags, DMs, mentions. I saw what happened. You didn't deserve that. Esakota, I get it. Stay strong. They always come for the quiet ones. It was strange to be seen all at once. She wasn't used to it. People usually passed her by like she was part of the furniture. Now they were calling her brave, a symbol, a moment. She didn't feel like any of those things. She just felt tired. When her dad returned, his expression had changed. Not angry now, focused. They're calling an emergency board meeting tonight, he said, sitting beside her. I told them if this doesn't get addressed by midnight, we're going public with everything. She tilted her head. Everything? Employee complaints, mishandled ADA protocols, past lawsuits swept under the rug. All of it. She gave him a look, half amused. He shrugged. You're not the only one they've treated like this. You're just the first one they couldn't ignore. She pulled her legs down and leaned into him. Then she typed something, slowly. He wasn't always this way, have you noticed? Do I have to speak? He looked at her, softening. Only if you want to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the floor, her fingers fiddling with the frayed drawstring of her hoodie. Finally, she typed. Then, yes, I want to. Outside the lounge, a dozen conversations were happening at once. People speculated, whispered, filmed. Inside, Cailey prepared to become more than a story. She was ready to be heard. The boardroom at Skyrise Air's East Terminal headquarters had never been used for anything like this. Most days, it was filled with men in tailored suits and women in smart blouses, arguing over quarterly projections or how to shave fractions of a cent from their in-light costs. But tonight, the air was different, thick with tension, shame, and the unspoken fear of exposure. 12 directors sat around the glass table. They had flown in from different parts of the country within hours. Some wore concern plainly. Others wore it like a suit jacket they planned to remove the second it was safe to relax again. At the head of the table stood Robert Gallagher. He didn't bother sitting. He didn't offer pleasantries. His presence was colder than the A/C humming overhead. You all saw the video, he said simply. So we're not here to debate whether or not it happened. What we're here to do is decide what happens next. One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Shelton, cleared his throat. Robert, let's slow down. There are procedures. Don't start with procedures, Robert snapped. You want to talk about procedures? We've had complaints against ground staff ignored for 3 years straight. Our disability accommodation policies are buried under 11 layers of HR fluff that no frontline employee has time to read. And this happened at my gate. My daughter... There was a silence no one dared break. Shelton adjusted his tie. We're not saying it wasn't serious. She was humiliated. Physically. Publicly. Because someone looked at her and saw a problem instead of a person. He looked down the table, letting the moment hang. Now, he continued, you can pretend this is about PR, or about protecting the airline's image, or you can recognize that this is about the culture we've let grow under our nose. I built this company to be different, not just better, different. If we don't act decisively, then we're not worth one more passenger's trust. There were a few murmurs, a couple of hesitant nods. Diane Walker is to be terminated immediately, Robert said. No severance, no NDA. Let her speak if she wants. Let her twist. She made her choices. She gets to live with them. A woman near the end of the table, Priya, raised her hand slightly. What about the girl, Cailey? Is she okay? Robert paused. She's strong. But that's not the point. She shouldn't have had to be strong, not for something like this. Across the airport, in a quiet media room prepared just hours earlier, Cailey sat with a soft light glowing behind her and a small mic clipped to her hoodie. She had chosen the hoodie deliberately. Red and black, a color that made her feel bolder. The frayed cuffs didn't matter, they were hers. Her dad had offered her a publicist, a lawyer, even a speechwriter. She turned all of it down. What she had, instead, was her voice, typed out on her phone in short bursts, and read aloud by a translator standing off-camera. The camera started rolling. The translator gave her a nod. Cailey tapped her phone, then turned the screen toward them. "My name is Cailey Gallagher. I'm 16 years old. I'm deaf. And yesterday a woman hit me in front of 50 people because I didn't move fast enough." The translator spoke each sentence slowly, clearly, her tone neutral but not robotic. She thought I was ignoring her, but I wasn't. I never even heard her voice. Cailey swallowed and kept typing. This wasn't the first time someone thought my silence meant I didn't matter. It won't be the last. But today, I want you to see me. Not because of my dad. Not because of a video. Because I exist. And I deserve better. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. But everyone deserves better. The video was scheduled to go live in 20 minutes. No teasers, no countdown, just a simple post from Skyrise Air's official account. A message from Cailey Gallagher. "Please watch." The company had already seen the numbers. The clip from Gate 22 had amassed 4.7 million views across platforms. The comments were a mix of outrage, disbelief, and sadness. A few were cruel, of course. They always were. But the overwhelming tide was behind her. For once. Inside the gate, now cleared of passengers for the day, Diane Walker sat alone in a small conference room with a man from HR and an officer from airport security. Her eyes were sunken. Her blouse was wrinkled. She'd been crying, but no one acknowledged it. The HR rep handed her a folder. "This is your final paperwork. You're no longer permitted in any SCURS terminal, effective immediately." "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're making me a scapegoat." "No, Ms. Walker," the officer said quietly. "You made yourself one." "I didn't even hit her," she argued. "It was the phone." "She's 16. You knocked a device out of a minor's hands in public. Do you understand how many witnesses came forward? How many cameras caught it?" Diane shook her head. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you did do it." I was trying to make her listen." The words fell flat. The officer stood. "This isn't an arrest, but I'd advise you to leave quickly and quietly." Back in the lounge, Robert was watching Cailey's video loop on a monitor. She had signed off at the end with a simple wave. Not a smile, not a bow, just a wave, like she was saying goodbye to the version of herself that had been stepped over too many times. He hadn't cried in years, but tonight, something pressed hard behind his eyes. He turned to see her standing behind him. She typed, then held out the screen. "You think people will change?" He looked at her for a long time. "I think they'll try," he said. "Some of them." She nodded once, then typed again. "So that's enough for now." They left the lounge together. No cameras, no escorts, just a father and daughter walking shoulder to shoulder through a terminal that would never be quite the same. People watched them, but not in the way they had before. Not with confusion, not with judgment, with recognition. And for some, with shame. In 100 airports across the country, Skyrise Air employees were already receiving new training memos. In some, managers paused and read aloud a quote from Cailey's speech. "Everyone deserves better." By morning, it would be printed on the boarding passes. 3 weeks later, Gate 22 looked different. Not in any obvious way. The beige walls were still beige, the intercom still beeped every few minutes, and the same flickering vending machine in the corner still stubbornly refused to take dollar bills with creases. But something invisible had shifted. It was in the posture of the staff, now trained to scan not just boarding passes but faces. It was in the tone of voices lowered with care, and it was in the printed plaque, newly installed on the wall near the counter, where passengers lined up to board. In honor of Cailey Gallagher, a reminder that every voice deserves to be heard. Below it, a simple sign in bold print and braille: all communication needs are welcome here. Cailey stood in front of it, hands in her hoodie pocket, reading the words without emotion. She'd already seen pictures of it online. Her name had been shared more times than she could count. People had called her brave, inspiring, powerful. But standing here, in the same place where it all happened, didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Her father stood a few steps behind her, watching quietly. He'd let her decide whether to come. He'd made no promises, no speeches. Just offered the day and the option. Flight 761 to Charlotte is now boarding all priority passengers, a voice crackled from the speaker above. Cailey didn't flinch. Her eyes were locked on the words engraved into the metal. She pulled out her phone and typed slowly. It still feels weird, seeing my name. Robert walked up beside her and read the screen. I know. She typed again. Not bad, just like it belongs to someone else. He nodded. A lot of people see you as a symbol now. She turned, raising her brow. Not fair, he admitted, but maybe it helps them listen better. She shrugged, then gave him a look that made him laugh quietly. All right, he said. I'll stop talking. They moved toward the gate slowly, their boarding group now called. The gate agent on duty, a young black woman with natural twists pulled into a bun, stood with a small digital board in hand. She smiled at Cailey and held it up. Welcome aboard, Ms. Gallagher. We're honored to have you. Cailey smiled back. Not a performance, a real one. The agent handed her a laminated card with a QR code and pointed to it. She scanned it. A menu popped up. Preset buttons for common phrases in American Sign Language, digital typing, and a real-time chat feature with the flight crew. No app to download, no login required. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed. Thank you. As they walked the jet bridge, Cailey slowed, taking in the details. There were braille labels on the railing. A new placard near the entry explained assistance options for passengers with hearing, vision, and mobility needs. She nodded to herself. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin gleamed. Soft leather, warm lighting, and a little more space than anyone really needed. Cailey dropped into her seat and tugged her hood down. Across the aisle, a man in a navy blazer gave her a quick glance, then a double take. You're her, aren't you? Cailey blinked. Robert raised an eyebrow. The man looked slightly embarrassed, but continued. I saw your video. I have 2 daughters, just wanted to say what you did mattered, a lot. Cailey smiled slightly and gave a small wave. Her dad looked at her, mouthing the words slowly and clearly. Want me to switch seats? She shook her head. The man didn't speak again. He just nodded once more and turned back to his tablet. The plane began to taxi. Cailey felt the low hum vibrate beneath her feet, that rising pressure of movement and anticipation. It was always her favorite part, when the world hadn't decided what the journey would feel like yet. Midway through the flight, a flight attendant arrived with a tray and a tablet. She knelt beside Cailey's seat, holding up the screen. The words read, Would you like anything to drink or eat? Tap. Your choice or type below. Cailey typed. Ginger ale and the snack mix, not the weird crackers. The attendant smiled, laughed quietly, and nodded. She returned a few minutes later with a silver tray and a note. The not weird snack mix, got it. Cailey laughed. That soundless laugh that only her chest felt, but it counted. When they landed, the crew let her disembark first, a quiet courtesy. Not because she'd asked for it, but because someone had remembered. At baggage claim, they waited for their suitcase to spin into view. Robert checked his watch but didn't rush. A little boy standing nearby pointed at Cailey and tugged on his mother's hand. That's the girl from the video. Cailey smiled gently, waved once. The boy waved back, wide-eyed, before turning shyly into his mom's jacket. It wasn't about fame, it never had been. She hadn't wanted to become anyone's headline. She just wanted to get on a plane without being treated like a problem. And now it wasn't just about her anymore. A notification buzzed on her phone. She opened it. Toby, they want you to speak at that youth rights conference in D.C. You gonna do it? She stared at the screen, then typed back, maybe. I'm not done flying. He responded with a string of airplane emojis and one that looked like a microphone on fire. Robert read over her shoulder. He's not wrong. She looked at her dad. I don't want to be the story forever. You won't be, he said. You'll outgrow it. She tilted her head. I mean that in a good way, he clarified. Their suitcase tumbled down the belt. He grabbed it, and they headed toward the exit. Outside the terminal, the sun hung low, casting gold across the pavement. A car pulled up to the curb, a sleek black SUV sent by the company. Cailey looked back once. The terminal doors slid shut behind her. She would fly again. Not as a passenger people pitied or praised, but as someone fully present, fully seen. The world hadn't fixed itself, not yet, but it had listened, and that was a beginning worth boarding for.